I don't pry anymore when patients lie about their symptoms. Having been in the medical field for 15 years, I have seen it all. Or at least I thought I had. Sometimes I look back on that day and wish I had expanded my views of what constitutes as scientific. Maybe it would have been smarter to accept that there are just some things outside of the current realm of understanding. Maybe then I wouldn't be in the situation I find myself in now. Regardless, I have seen a lot of sick and anxious people. In fact, I had been known in our town for being the gentle doctor, the one parents would send their kids to when they'd graduated from pediatrics and were rounding the bend towards college age, to ease into the transition between childhood and adult health care. I even took on those with a history of psychiatric problems and developmental disabilities. My aim was always to create a comfortable environment, knowing full well that some of my patients wouldn't seek out a doctor otherwise. So when I met one particular patient, we'll call him Theo, I was not at all caught off guard by his demeanor. The boy sitting in the nylon chair in the corner of the room was squirrely and anxious. A wayfish plume of red hair stuck out over his eyes, the whites of which looked bloodshot and strained. His skin was blotchy, and he wore a hoodie pulled up over his face and neck. I suspected he was covering something up with it, perhaps the rest of the apparent rash or worse. I greeted him kindly, introducing myself. I did not attempt to offer a handshake, considering he did not give the impression of wanting to be touched. At this point in my career, I knew better than to catch anyone off guard, especially someone in such discomfort. As I watched the boy shaking in his seat, I was prepared for the possibility that he might work himself into a panic attack or bolt from my office entirely. When asked if he could remove his clothes while I waited in the hall, he refused. He told me that the hoodie needed to stay. We compromised in that he could wear it over the Johnny, as long as he could lift it up enough for me to check his heart and blood pressure. I reassured him that, at first, we would only have a simple conversation. At his own pace, he could take me through his symptoms and concerns. I even asked him if he would prefer a male doctor, given the concerns about showing his body. He shook his head stiffly and insisted that he only wanted to get the appointment over with. Still, I continued to inquire about his support system. Did he have someone who might be able to come in with him to keep him calm? Perhaps a family member or trusted friend? My stepdad, he ground out, teeth chattering. He's waiting in the car, but he won't come. He just wants to make sure. He shook his head abruptly, as if convincing himself to cut off any further explanation. We just haven't been seeing eye to eye lately. I started going through possibilities in my head. Maybe it was substances that brought him here and he didn't want to admit it, or show the evidence on his skin, or a myriad of other stressors that college life brought on. But he hadn't disclosed it during intake. I see. I nodded. Well, I must remind you that you are an adult and you need to give your own consent to be treated. You understand that, right? He nodded, but I noticed the clench of his jaw escalating to a grind. I wondered if I was too out of my depth. If he needed to speak to someone in the mental health field before he'd be comfortable enough for an exam. While you did sign the forms, I wouldn't feel comfortable providing treatment if it's causing you such distress. Perhaps we should reschedule at a later date when you can come back with a family. No. He cut me off, voice an abrupt exhale. Just check my heart, please. I quirked a brow, surprised at the emphasis on his heart. Perhaps there was something he wasn't telling me about his condition. I had assumed that his main concern was the rash, likely contact dermatitis, or something a bit less extreme. He'd been tight-lipped about most of the symptoms. Until now. The sudden urgency struck a chord with me and I agreed, setting up my tools to begin the exam. But Theo soon began to screw up his face in disgust. Confused, I asked him what the matter was. "The smell?" He gagged. "What is that smell?" I paused before approaching him further. The only smell I could think of that could be different was the rose perfume I was wearing. I tensed, hoping I had not somehow given the boy an allergic reaction. He retched suddenly, his hood falling to his shoulders at the sudden jolt and exposing a nasty infection. Purple veins crawling outward from a wound, or rather 2 wounds. They were dark with dried blood and yellowed at the edges. Concerned for my patient and worried I was making things worse, I removed myself and went to the nearest bathroom. I scrubbed my pulse points, where I always applied my perfume, catching the dazed expression on my face in the mirror. My heart rapped against my chest feverishly. The wound on Theo may have been a snake bite or something of the sort. Some animal? It wouldn't have been the first time I'd seen it. I shook off my silly fears of what it might have been and hurried back to my patient. It was possible that the shaking and odd behavior were a result of shock, and I needed to take his concerns seriously, now more than ever. His head was once again tucked into the hoodie, but he allowed me to examine his chest with the stethoscope. As I shifted the end around to find the spot I had located in every patient before him, I found myself perplexed. I could feel the muscles tense underneath his skin, as if he was also becoming gravely concerned. The shaking had grown more excessive, and I tried to reassure him that at times these things could be tricky to locate. Something I was also trying desperately to convince myself of as well. But as I held my breath, the only sound I could hear in my expectant ears was the hollow sound of empty ribs. I hadn't noticed it before, but where the side of my hand settled on his skin, her felt as cold as stone. It was emanating. Just the same way that the sun could draw heat to your skin, he could pull it away just as easy. I began to stiffen, wondering incredulously if I had begun to hallucinate. There was a shift then. It felt as if the tension had built so strongly in the space between us that, before either of us moved, something would snap, a magnet whose pull I no longer had control over. The sinking realization set in that my silence was a confession. I had heard the physical confirmation of what we both knew to be true. It was then that his mouth opened, incisors gleaming. Before I could process the feeling, I was on the ground being torn away at like one of those anatomical models I used to play with as a child. First carotid, then jugular. Where I'd expected it to spurt, my blood was being siphoned away. It was as if some sucking mechanism was tucked inside him that I hadn't seen, along with so many other anomalies I had missed. I helplessly pawed at the young man, trying to scratch at his acne-ridden face. But the force of his feeding frenzy was too strong. The pressure on my larynx silencing any scream that could have fought its way out of me. At last, my vision swam with black, and my strength left me as I became limp and bloodless. When I woke, I tried to scream through the bloody gurgle of what was left of my throat. But the vocal cords must have been destroyed. They rushed me to the hospital and sewed me up. My voice hasn't been the same since. I've heard that around the office they still talk in hushed tones about the man who had a mental break and maimed a staff member. They'll never know the full story, and I won't tell them. Even when my throat fully heals and my voice box knits itself anew, I will agree with them. I will recount the story as another occupational hazard. I will smile and pick up new clients and try to go on as usual. I switch the news off knowing that this false story is better better for me to know and the public to believe they're safe. Except for you. There you are. Now you know. Reading my story while I remain anonymous, I suppose I just had to get it off my chest. After all, I lie to my own doctor quite a lot these days. I think I'm being stalked. I've been working at a supermarket close to my home for 4 months now, and 3 weeks ago while I was manning the register, a guy I've never seen in this area before came to check out. I don't know his name, so I'm going to call him Carl. Carl had very loud music playing from his headphones, which were around his neck, and I recognized the song. So trying to be friendly, I started up a conversation while scanning his items. He was slurring a bit while talking, but generally seemed nice, recommended me some other bands, and left. I thought nothing of this. He's a 40-ish-year-old man who was probably just passing by, and I live in a quiet, friendly town. I didn't think I'd ever see him again, until 30 minutes later. He walks back into the store with one of those old photo cameras around his neck and keeps standing around the register facing me while I'm working. Then he grabs some chocolate from the shelves close by and comes to check out. I don't really say anything this time and just scan the chocolate. He's standing there, holding his camera at his chest with one hand and angling it directly at me, then asks for a pack of batteries we keep behind a display. So I go over to the display. He follows me and continues angling the camera at me while I'm crouched down under the glass trying to get his batteries. I go back, scan the batteries, and he insists I keep the chocolate. No matter how much I decline and say I'm not allowed to accept gifts, I am, but he doesn't need to know that. He just leaves the chocolate on the conveyor and walks out. The next day he does the same thing. Buys me chocolate, insists I keep it, leaves. And then the next day too. Neither of those days did I really reply to him or try to spark conversation because at that point I felt unsafe and honestly a little insane. I told my coworkers and my mom about it. I am 19 and still living with her. And they all told me I should be flattered. I had 2 days off after this and stayed home crocheting and playing video games. When I went back to work, he showed up again, this time with his phone. He bought a ton of stuff and then shoved his phone in my face like he was trying to hand it to me. I'm confused and ask why he's giving me his phone, and he replies that he wants to leave it there to charge. I said we can't do that, but he's free to buy a charger from the store and charge it somewhere else. He keeps insisting and almost starts yelling over it. I call over my manager who tells him to leave and then stays at the register for a few minutes to give me a second to breathe and go drink some water. The next day I'm working again. He stops by, doesn't say anything to me, and walks out. Soon after, a local comes to the register and says some guy in his 40s is hanging out back and asks if he's meant to be there. I ask them to describe him, and it's the same guy, Carl. I tell my manager that at this point I'm legitimately scared, and she again tells me it's probably nothing, and he's just some hobo with nothing better to do. Then I have 4 days off. On my 3rd day off, I go out to walk my dog. I'm only around my apartment building. I don't go further than that little cluster of buildings in my area that nobody has any business being in unless they live there or are visiting someone. And I see him. I see Carl standing around with the children at the playground. In the middle of these houses, I immediately go to visit my neighbor, who's also my mom's friend, instead of going home because I don't want him to know exactly where I live if he didn't already. She tells me to call the non-emergency line. So I do. And they essentially tell me that I don't really have proof and they can't do anything, kind of implying that unless I actually get hurt, he's just some random regular guy and I'm being paranoid. And now I've called in sick from work for a week because I'm terrified of showing up and him being there following me home, maybe already knowing where I live or breaking in while I'm gone. Everyone around me is saying I'm anxious or that I have no proof he took photos of me. But you don't angle your camera at people like that casually. He was very poorly hiding the fact that he was taking photos of me. He had no business being around my house. He had no business buying me so many chocolates. And he had no business getting aggressive with me over not being able to leave his phone at my workplace to charge. I feel crazy for thinking I'm being stalked. I was even told by a family member that I'm not hot enough to be stalked, which is just insane. I don't know. I just need to be told I'm not actually crazy, and this does sound like stalking. There's a floor in my apartment building that doesn't exist. Not 13. That would be too cliche. Although it doesn't have a 13th floor, but not for supernatural reasons. It just doesn't go that high. Some of the residents call it floor 3.5 or 3 3/4 to invoke a Harry Potter vibe, but both of those are far too whimsical for my tastes. I just call it the dead floor, which I know isn't any less cliche than floor 13, but it feels appropriate. The elevators in our building all use analog dials above the doors to show what floor they're on. On rare and, as far as anyone can tell, random occasions, the needle will stop at the exact zenith of the dial, where there's no number. When this happens, the elevator freezes and the door opens to a floor which physically can't be there. You can tell from looking at the outside of the building that there's no room for a secret floor in the middle, and the stairwell passes right through it. The superintendent briefs all new residents on the 3.5 floor, and more people take him seriously than you might think. Occurrences like that aren't all that rare out here. But even for those who don't take him seriously at first, the issue is regularly brought up at tenant meetings, and there's a list of rules posted right beneath the control panel in the elevator, so that we always know what to do. 1. When the elevator stops at the 3.5 floor, do not push any buttons before turning off the lights at the end of the hall. Each button you press will only reduce the amount of time you have. 2. Calmly but briskly walk to the opposite end of the hall, leaving any personal effects in the elevator so as not to encumber you. 3. Do not look directly out the windows or into any mirrors. 4. Do not look into the peepholes of any apartment doors. 5. Do not approach or enter any apartment with an open door. 6. Do not respond or react to any sounds or voices coming from inside the apartments. 7. If you hear something behind you, do not stop or turn around. Make your way to the opposite end of the hall, turning around only when you've heard a door shut. 8. When you reach the end of the hall, read the bulletin board and sign the form. Please make sure the pen is easily visible and accessible for the next person. 9. Set the pendulum clock hanging on the wall to the approximate time within 3.5 minutes of the local time according to an online device. Turn the dial on the thermostat to match the actual temperature, as indicated by the gauge on the bottom half. Turn the dimmer switch until the hall lights are completely out. 10. So long as there is nothing behind you, turn around and return to the elevator. Do not turn around once you are in the elevator until the doors are closed. If the ritual was completed correctly, the doors will close automatically. If the doors do not close, also do not turn around. That last sentence is pretty ominous, obviously, but I don't actually know what happens if you mess up the ritual. None of my neighbors who have completed the ritual have ever failed. And it's not really that hard to mess up. The building dates back to at least the 80s, so it's possible it's been decades since anyone's failed. Not everyone in my building has walked the dead floor, and some people have walked it multiple times. I don't think it's completely random. Whatever force is behind this wants the ritual completed, so it doesn't pick people who wouldn't be capable of doing it, like the infirmed or little kids. It always picks people who are riding alone, probably because an extra body would be too tempted to wander around and mess it up. If you're keen on avoiding the ritual, you can just never take the elevator alone and take the stairs instead. I asked the superintendent once if he ever considered just declaring the elevators out of order. He said no, but the last superintendent did. I tried to take the stairs as much as I could myself, only using the elevator when I had groceries or something, sometimes loitering in the lobby, waiting for someone to come along and ride with me. But last week I got home late, and I knew I'd be waiting forever for someone else to come along, so my choice was to lug my bags up 5 flights of stairs or risk the elevator alone. I risked the elevator, and I think you can guess what happened. It didn't catch me off guard, at least. I had set my bags on the floor and taken out my phone, taking a photo of the rules and turning the flashlight and video camera on just in case. As soon as the elevator started rising, my gaze stayed locked on the needle as it slowly arced along its path upwards. My eyes went wide, and my heart nearly stopped as I watched it come to an immovable stop right between floors 3 and 4. The elevator came to an abrupt stop as well, the lights flickering before settling on a dim amber glow as the doors slowly creaked open, revealing floor 3.5. The only light came from the elevator and moonlight streaming through the dingy windows on the right-hand side. Nearly everything I could see was some faded shade of blue. The carpet was worn, the paint was chipping, and when the elevator doors opened, the stagnant air rushed in like that was the first change of pressure that had happened in ages. The hallway was empty, void of any sound of plumbing or ventilation. Just the subtle creaking and settling of the building itself. All the doors on the left side were shut tight, and I heard no sign of life or activity behind them. And at the very end of the hall, I saw the bulletin board, the clock, the thermostat, and the light switch. It took every ounce of strength I had to resist pushing the elevator button. But I suspected that it wouldn't just be a waste of time, but actively ringing the diner bell for whatever was behind all of this. I looked at my phone to see not only was the light off, but that the screen was flickering with odd, static, and distorted text, rendering it completely unusable. I cursed softly and shoved it into my pocket, clenching my trembling fists as I desperately tried to summon the will to leave the elevator. I knew that every second that passed was a second wasted, and so I forced one foot onto the carpet and then the other. Despite how worn it looked, it was oddly soft and sound absorbent, like it was engulfing my feet ever so slightly. Once I was out, the only thing left to do was get it over with, so I marched forward as quickly as I dared, trying desperately not to make any noise that might alert anyone to my presence. The first rule I broke was looking out the windows. The windows were foggy with old moisture, trapped between the panes, obscuring whatever lay beyond. I could make out the silhouettes of tall and strangely Gothic-looking buildings. I caught a few dull amber embers, either inside the buildings or on outdoor lanterns, but otherwise everything looked fairly dim and lifeless. It was windy outside, windy enough to rattle the window panes, and I was suddenly very concerned that they might shatter. I didn't understand why at first, as it took a moment for my conscious mind to register the dark and amorphous form slowly making its way along them. I perceived it to be some manner of vaguely mollusk-like creature, limblessly clinging to the outside of the building with its flat and sticky underside. It convulsed and undulated and shuddered as it aimlessly propelled itself along its repugnant course. I don't know if it knew I was there, or if it cared, but I instantly averted my gaze and continued down along the hallway. On the left-hand side, there were ornate mirrors hung between each apartment, all tarnished, all shattered, and placed out of sync with the windows so that they reflected nothing of the outside world. In the periphery of my vision, I spied reflections of things that either weren't actually there or were perhaps simply not visible to my unaided eyes. Either way, I decided to adhere to the rules in this instance and not look directly at them. I cast my gaze upwards instead to an especially hideous, though otherwise not overtly supernatural, popcorn ceiling. It was heavily stained, and it honestly wouldn't have surprised me if it contained asbestos. The stains were amorphous, yet oddly concentric, like they were spreading out from their loci as far as they could whilst deftly weaving around any obstacles, almost like living growths of some kind. I reflexively came to a stop when I heard a door creak open behind me, but I caught myself before I gave in to the urge to turn around. When you're in such a heightened state of fight or flight, fighting the instinct to look at any and every sound you hear is unbelievably draining. The instant I heard a single foot softly land on the carpet, I immediately resumed my march forward. I don't know how long that hall was, but it felt far longer than it looked. I can't be sure if it was the adrenaline giving me bullet time recall, or if the dead floor was outside of our time as much as it was outside of space, but either way, the sense that time was running out just kept mounting inside of me. When I came to a stop at the end of the hall, I could still hear shambling, padded footsteps shuffling towards me. Barely audible whispers and whimpers simmered behind almost every door I had passed. And once a cackling scream in the distance broke out without warning and ended just as abruptly, as if something had forcibly silenced it. Doing my best to ignore all of it, I focused my attention on the note pinned to the bulletin board. It read as follows: "Apologies and / or congratulations for this honor-able martyrdom. We hope it has been a pleasant experience, but are indifferent that it was not. Please inform your superintendent that we have recently experienced a statistically significant increase in demand for phantasmagoric filament due to metapolitical events we have no control over but are complicit in and stand to profit from. Please note that this is an adequate explanation and / or justification for any increase in sleep and / or ontological abnormalities experienced by the tenants of your domicile. We apologize but are not liable for the inconvenience. Please also remind your superintendent that his customary tribute of a bushel of kosher salt is to be delivered in a burlap sack, dropped down the out-of-order garbage chute. Additional failures to comply with these requirements may result in the garbage chute no longer being out of order. Should that occur, we will not be held liable for residents being lured into the chute by unseelie sanitation workers. Signing your true name upon this notice acknowledges you understand your responsibilities in relaying its contents to its intended recipient. We hope, without empirical basis, that you have a safe return home. Surreptitiously, serendipitously, yours." Desperate to get out of there, I grabbed the pen sitting on top of the bulletin board and signed and dated the form with a rapid scribbling scrawl. Setting the pen back atop the board, I carefully set the time on the clock, the temperature on the thermostat, and then turned the light switch as far as it would go to the left. And then I waited. I had never heard the being behind me go back into its room, and I could still sense its presence as it silently stood there, staring at the back of my neck. I wasn't sure how close it was, only that it was too close. After standing there for nearly a minute, wondering if I hadn't done something or done something wrong, I finally heard it shuffle off, followed by the soft creaking of door hinges and a gentle thud as it snapped shut. With a sharp exhale, I turned around as quickly as I dared to make sure the coast was clear. It was hard to confirm that for sure, since with the hall lights off, the light from the elevator made everything outside of its direct illumination an impenetrable shadow. But I wasn't willing to waste any more time. I bolted straight to the elevator, covering the distance in what felt like a tenth of the time it had taken me to walk out. Once I was inside, I stood perfectly still, refusing to turn around, and waited for the doors to close. When they didn't shut immediately, I started counting. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. At the count of 3.5, I heard the doors start to slide shut. I would have stayed perfectly still until they had closed completely, like I was supposed to, if someone hadn't grabbed hold of one of them and held them open. I instantly spun around and saw a tall man in a shabby brown suit standing there. His face an indistinct blur that was impossible to focus on. I backed up against the wall for all the good that would do me, but otherwise went rigid in fear. I didn't scream, I didn't attack or run, I just stared at him wide-eyed as I waited for him to make his move. For his part, he made no hostile gesture or sounds, nor any attempt to step into the elevator. In the hand that wasn't holding on to the elevator door, he held up a thick and hefty manila envelope. He silently tilted his head towards it and lingered on it for a moment before looking towards me. Sincerest apologies for the breach of protocol, kindly kinder. But as the refuse chute is out of order, I'm afraid I must entrust you with delivering this to your superintendent. Post haste, he said as neutrally as he could in his distorted, staticky voice. He stood there in perfect silence and stillness, as if he was expecting me to react. When I slowly started to reach out for the envelope, he unceremoniously tossed it to the elevator floor where it landed with a horrific thud. Your discretion is appreciated and contractually required, he said, stepping back slightly and allowing the elevator doors to close. Please do not decline the elevator again if proffered. Should we have need of your services again, it would be a most awkward encounter if we met upon the stairs. The elevator ascended as soon as the door was shut and arrived at my floor like nothing was amiss. The next morning I handed the envelope over to the superintendent without needing to explain what it was. He knew immediately. I never opened it or asked him what it was, because I like to imagine it was worth it, even when I know it probably wasn't. You'd think all of that would have been enough to get me to swear off the elevator for good, and it very nearly would have been, had it not been for the strange man's parting words. It would indeed be very awkward if I were to meet him upon the stairs. I need to say up front that I still hike. People ask me that first, before anything else. Did you stop? No, I didn't stop. I just don't hike alone anymore, and I never touch the cairns. I'll explain that. I started hiking the Kettlewood Ridge Trail the spring my divorce was finalized. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that part because it's not the interesting part, but I want you to understand why I was out there alone 4 or 5 days a week, sometimes before work, sometimes after. I needed somewhere to put my body where my brain couldn't follow the same 3 arguments in a loop. Kettlewood was 11 minutes from my apartment, steep enough to matter, empty enough that I usually didn't see another person the whole way up. The trail is a little under 6 miles round trip if you go all the way to the overlook and back. It's marked with mile markers, small brown posts, routed numbers, nothing fancy, put in by the county parks department sometime in the 90s, according to a guy I talked to at the trailhead once. Marker 1 is maybe 400 yards past the lot. Marker 12 is the second to last one, right before the switchbacks start up to the overlook. There's a cairn at marker 12. Not an official one, not something the county built. Somebody stacked it there the way hikers do. A little pyramid of flat stones, maybe knee-high, sitting just off the trail on a flat shelf of granite where the path bends hard to the left. I noticed it my second week out there because it was well made. Balanced. The kind of thing that takes patience. I didn't think about it again for months. It was late September when I actually paid attention to it, and only because it had fallen. I remember stopping at marker 12 to catch my breath. I always stopped there. It's the steepest grade on the whole trail, and seeing the stones scattered across the shelf like something had knocked through them. Wind, I figured, or a deer. Stuff falls apart in the woods. That's what the woods do. 3 days later, it was rebuilt. Not just rebuilt bigger. 6 stones instead of 5, and taller, with a flat capstone on top that hadn't been there before. I remember standing in front of it a little too long, doing the math in my head. Nobody hikes this trail. In 4 months, I had passed maybe a dozen people total, and half of those were the same retired guy with the golden retriever who did the first mile and turned back. Somebody had come out here, specifically to this spot, specifically to rebuild a cairn that had fallen down. I told myself that was a nice thing, some hiker taking pride in the trail. I took a picture of it, I still have the picture, and kept walking. Here's where it stopped being a nice thing. Over the next 2 months, I watched that cairn get knocked down and rebuilt 11 times. I know it was 11 because I started counting, and then I started photographing it every single time I passed, because somewhere around the 4th cycle, I stopped believing it was wind. Wind doesn't knock down a cairn and leave a perfect radius of stones. Wind scatters things downhill with gravity in a fan. What I was looking at was different every time stones moved 4, 5 feet uphill, against the slope, arranged almost carefully, like someone had swept their arm through it rather than let it fall. And the rebuild was never identical. That's the part I couldn't shake once I noticed it. A cairn that a person keeps stacking the same way over and over, out of habit. That's one kind of thing. This one changed. Sometimes it was 5 stones. Once it was 9, stacked into something almost like a spire, nearly to my shoulder. Once, and this is the one that made me stop hiking for 7 days. The only break I took that whole fall, it wasn't a pyramid at all. It was a ring. Stones laid flat in a circle on the granite shelf, empty in the middle, like a fire pit that had never held a fire. I didn't touch it. I want to be clear about that. I never once touched that cairn in either direction. I only ever looked and photographed and kept walking faster than before. I want to be honest about the explanations I gave myself because I think that's the part people relate to. You don't jump straight to being afraid of a pile of rocks. You build a ladder of reasonable explanations first, and you climb down it one rung at a time. Rung 1, it's a ranger doing trail maintenance, and cairns get knocked and remade as part of some marking system I don't understand. I called the county parks department. There is no trail maintenance program on Kettlewood Ridge. There hasn't been since 2019 when they lost the funding. The woman on the phone sounded genuinely confused that I was asking. Rung 2, it's another regular hiker, somebody who's out there on a different schedule than me, and we're just missing each other, and this is their thing, their little ritual, and it means nothing. I started varying my times. Dawn one day, dusk the next, midday on the weekend. I hiked it at 5:40 in the morning in November. Frost still on the grass, specifically to see if I'd catch someone at marker 12. I saw no one on any of those trips, at any hour, anywhere on that trail. Not once. And the cairn kept changing anyway. On a schedule that didn't care what time I came. Rung 3, and this is the one I stayed on the longest because it's the one that let me keep hiking, is that it didn't matter. People are strange. The woods are full of strange, harmless things. I was building a story out of rocks. I stayed on rung 3 until the night I found the 12th cairn had my initials in it. Early December. Snow hadn't come yet, but it was close, that flat gray cold that presses down before the first real storm. I almost didn't go out. I went anyway because by then the trail wasn't really about clearing my head anymore. I think, if I'm honest, I was going to check on the cairn the way you'd check on a wound. It had fallen again. That part was normal. What wasn't normal was that the stones weren't scattered. This time they were arranged, flat on the granite, into 2 letters. My initials. Not close to my initials. Exactly my initials in stones maybe 8 inches long, laid out with the same careful patience as every cairn before it. Like whoever built it had all the time in the world and had used it to spell my name into the side of a mountain that, as far as I knew, exactly one other living person also visited. I never told anyone my initials mattered to me out there. I never told anyone I hiked that trail at all, except my sister once, in passing. I hadn't posted about it. My car, a gray Civic, nothing memorable, was the only thing that would connect me to that spot, and only if someone had specifically watched for it, specifically noted the mornings it was in that gravel lot, and the mornings it wasn't. I stood at marker 12 for a long time, long enough that the cold started getting into my hands through my gloves. And the thing I remember most from that moment isn't fear. Exactly, it's the specific, sick understanding that I had been wrong about who was watching whom. I had thought I was the one paying attention, coming back, counting, photographing, building my little file of evidence, like I was the one in control of the story. But somebody had been reading me the whole time, closer than I'd been reading them, and had finally decided to write back. I did not hike home the normal way. I went straight down the fall line, off trail, through brush, and I didn't look at my phone or call anyone until I was sitting in my car with the doors locked. I filed a report. I want people to know that because I think there's a version of this story where I just disappear into the woods and nobody ever knows what happened. And I don't want that version to be the one anyone remembers. I have photographs time-stamped 11 cairns across 2 months ending in the 12th. The deputy who took the report was kind about it, and also, I could tell, unsure what crime had actually been committed. Nobody had touched me. Nobody had spoken to me. Someone had built and rebuilt a small stack of rocks over and over on public land, and one time they'd built my initials. They did increase patrols on the trail for a few weeks that winter. I know because I asked. Twice. Nothing was ever found. No trail camera footage, there isn't one out there. No other hikers who'd seen anything unusual, though there was hardly anyone to ask. I went back to marker 12 exactly once more, in March, with my sister and her dog in full daylight. Both of us talking too loud the whole way up on purpose. The shelf of granite was bare. No stones at all, not scattered, not stacked, not even the flattened patch of dead grass a cairn that size should have left behind after 4 months in one spot. Like it had never been there. Like somebody had taken every stone one at a time and carried them somewhere else. I still hike Kettlewood. Almost every week, still, because it turned out I needed the trail more than I was afraid of it, and because staying away felt like a second thing being taken from me. But I don't go past marker 11 alone anymore. I've never told anyone the actual reason. Why not my sister? Not the guy I've been seeing since spring. Nobody. I always just say the last stretch is too steep for a solo hike, which is true, and which is also not the reason. Sometimes on the way up, I think about looking, about walking the extra 400 yards to the shelf just to see if it started again. I never do it. But I think about it every single time.